It was a quiet afternoon when Elon Musk walked into a small, local dealership, hoping to buy a car in cash. As he stepped through the door, a bell above it rang, but the salesman barely looked up. The old dealership smelled like leather and oil, the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. A few cars were lined up in the lot, but there was nothing extraordinary about this place. Nothing that would suggest a billionaire would ever walk through its doors. Elon didn't make a grand entrance, no fanfare, no entourage. He was wearing a simple hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. Nothing about him screamed tech mogul, except for his eyes, which burned with the intensity of a man who had changed the world. "Can I help you?" The salesman, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a lazy demeanor, asked without looking up. He was busy flipping through a magazine, clearly uninterested in a potential customer. "I'd like to buy a car," Elon said, his voice calm, almost too calm. The salesman glanced up and chuckled, sizing him up. "Buy a car? Sure you don't want to go somewhere more your style?" He waved a hand dismissively toward the high-end luxury cars displayed on the other side of town. "This place isn't exactly for you." Elon, unfazed by the tone, walked up to the counter and pulled out a thick stack of bills. Without a word, he placed it on the counter. The salesman raised an eyebrow and then let out a soft laugh. "Cash?" The salesman shook his head, clearly amused. "Buddy, you know that's not how it works here. We don't just accept cash for a car like that. You need a bank check or a credit card. If you're really serious about buying, maybe try somewhere else." The atmosphere in the room shifted. The salesman's laugh had an edge of mockery now, almost as if he was expecting Elon to walk out. Embarrassed by his mistake, Elon didn't respond to the joke. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, metallic card, his ID. The salesman's eyes flickered as he took it, still uncertain. The moment he saw it, the laughter stopped. For a second, the salesman just stared at the ID, his smile slowly fading into confusion. He didn't know who this person was, but he could feel something was off. His gut told him that this wasn't just another customer, but someone important, far more important than anyone he had ever imagined. Elon stood there, silent, as the salesman finally processed what he was looking at. The recognition hit him like a ton of bricks. This was Elon Musk, the man who was responsible for changing the way the world viewed technology. The person who had sent rockets into space and redefined electric cars. His heart skipped a beat. What was happening? After what felt like an eternity, the salesman cleared his throat and handed the ID back, his face flushed with embarrassment. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't realize," he stammered, but his voice had lost its earlier arrogance. Elon looked at him, his expression unchanged. "I'm serious about buying the car," he said, his calmness almost unsettling. "Are you going to sell it to me? Or should I go somewhere else?" The salesman quickly regained his composure, now desperate to make amends. "Of course, sir. Right away." He rushed to the computer, scrambling to make things right, but his mind was racing. How could he have laughed at someone who had so much power, influence, and wealth? It was a mistake he would never forget. But just as things seemed to calm down, a sudden realization hit the salesman. He didn't know how much Elon actually wanted to spend. The stack of cash. Was it enough for the car? Or did he have a deeper reason for being here? He hesitated before asking, "How much are you planning to spend, sir?" Elon didn't even look at the price tag. Instead, he simply answered, "Enough." The salesman, still processing the situation, could barely get his mind around it. What kind of man buys a car with that much cash without even asking about the price? And why was Elon Musk, of all people, standing in his small dealership? Little did the salesman know, this was only the beginning of a much bigger story. What happened next would be a twist no one saw coming, one that would change the way he looked at the world forever. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to see how this unbelievable encounter unfolds. The salesman, still fumbling around trying to process the situation, finally managed to bring Elon over to the car of his choice, a sleek black sports sedan. As they approached the vehicle, the salesman started his usual pitch, explaining the features of the car. But Elon wasn't interested in hearing any of it. He looked over the car, inspecting it carefully, but there was something in his gaze that was far more focused than anyone could imagine. It was as if he wasn't just looking at the car, but at the entire world around him, calculating, assessing, and silently figuring out what his next move would be. The salesman continued to talk, but his voice began to sound distant, as though he was speaking from a different world entirely. "Isn't it a beautiful car?" the salesman said, his voice quivering a little now, as he tried to regain his confidence. Elon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a small device, one that looked like an ordinary phone but clearly wasn't. He swiped his finger across it, making a few quick gestures on the screen. The salesman watched, confused and intrigued, as Elon finished typing and handed the device over to him. The salesman, now bewildered, glanced at the screen. What he saw made his jaw drop. It was an encrypted message, only a few lines, but enough to make his heart race. The message wasn't just a simple confirmation of a sale. It was an invitation to a private meeting with Musk himself. The message read, "Meet me at the SpaceX facility tomorrow morning. I need your expertise." The salesman blinked, unable to comprehend what was happening. This wasn't just about a car anymore. Elon Musk wasn't here to make a regular purchase. He had a much bigger plan in mind. The words expertise lingered in his mind as if Elon had known something about him, something that would change his life forever. "Are you going to come?" Elon asked, his voice calm yet demanding. The salesman, still shocked, nodded. "Of course I'll be there." Elon didn't say another word. He turned and walked away, leaving the salesman standing there, still staring at the device in his hand. Minutes passed, and the dealership seemed to grow colder, quieter. The salesman, his mind racing with confusion and disbelief, suddenly realized that this wasn't just any car purchase, it was something bigger, something he couldn't yet understand. As Elon reached the door, he turned back for one final remark. "By the way, when I make a decision, it's never about the money. It's always about the impact." With that, Elon Musk stepped out, leaving the salesman to wonder what impact he might have just become a part of. But as the salesman watched him disappear into the distance, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. There was more to this encounter than he could ever have imagined. The next morning, as the sun barely began to rise, the salesman found himself standing at the gates of the SpaceX facility. His heart was pounding in his chest, the weight of yesterday's events still hanging heavily on his mind. He had no idea what to expect, but deep down, he knew that his life had just taken a turn he couldn't reverse. The massive, high-tech buildings of SpaceX loomed in front of him, their sleek surfaces reflecting the first rays of sunlight. Security guards at the entrance eyed him suspiciously, not knowing who he was or why he was there. They asked for his ID, and after a few moments of scanning, they allowed him through with no further questions. It was clear that anyone who had Elon Musk's personal invitation didn't need to explain themselves. The salesman walked inside, his footsteps echoing in the sterile hallways. The entire place felt futuristic, almost otherworldly, and for a moment he wondered what kind of world he was about to step into. The walls were lined with photos of rockets soaring into space, successful launches, and the occasional picture of Elon Musk himself, looking as enigmatic as ever. He was led down a long corridor and into a spacious conference room. The table was large, its surface gleaming, but it was the man standing at the end of the room that caught the salesman's attention. Elon Musk was there, looking just as calm and composed as he had the day before, only this time he wasn't wearing a hoodie. Instead, he had on a sleek suit, making the salesman feel even more out of place. "Good to see you made it," Elon said with a smile, motioning for the salesman to take a seat. The salesman sat down slowly, his mind racing. "What is this about, Mr. Musk?" he asked, his voice unsure but laced with curiosity. Elon leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together. "I don't usually reach out to people like you," he began, his tone serious. "But I need someone with your perspective." The salesman blinked, taken aback. "My perspective?" Elon nodded. "You see things differently than most people. You've worked with cars for years, but I can tell you've got a sharp mind beyond that. I need someone who can think on their feet and make quick decisions. I've got a project in mind, and it's not just about technology, it's about the future of humanity. I want you to be a part of it." The words hit the salesman like a wave. The future of humanity? It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel. And yet, there was something in Elon's eyes, something that made the salesman believe he wasn't joking. Elon continued, "I'm not asking you to leave your life behind. I'm asking you to join a mission that's bigger than anything you've ever imagined. You've spent your life helping people drive cars. Now, I want you to help people drive the future." The salesman's mind was spinning. He had come here to sell a car, but now he was being offered something far more valuable. But what did Elon mean by drive the future? Was this a metaphor, or was there something far more groundbreaking at play? Before he could ask, Elon reached into his bag and pulled out a small device. He handed it over to the salesman. It was a key, but not just any key. This one was engraved with symbols the salesman didn't recognize. "This key," Elon explained, "is for a project I'm working on, a revolutionary concept that could change the way the world operates. But it's not for just anyone. Only those who can see beyond the surface will be able to understand its importance." The salesman took the key, feeling its weight in his palm. It felt heavy with potential, and yet, he still had no idea what it was for. Elon seemed to sense his confusion. "You're probably wondering why someone like you, right?" Elon said, almost reading his mind. "The truth is, we're all a part of something bigger. The decisions we make now will shape the future for generations to come. And you, my friend, have something inside of you that makes you different. You don't just follow orders, you think for yourself. I need that kind of person." The salesman sat back, still processing everything. He had no idea where this was heading. But one thing was clear: this was the opportunity of a lifetime. Elon stood up and walked toward the door. "You don't have to decide right now," he said, turning back to look at the salesman. "Take some time. Think about it. But just know this: your life will never be the same once you step into this world." The salesman stood up, still holding the key, his hands trembling slightly. As he walked out of the room and back into the cool morning air, he felt like his entire life had been turned upside down. The key in his hand was more than just a physical object. It was a symbol of power, of change, and of a future that was rapidly approaching. But the biggest question remained: what was the key unlocking? The mystery deepens. What is Elon Musk's plan, and how is the salesman connected to it? Don't miss what happens next. The salesman spent the next few days in a daze, unable to shake the events that had unfolded. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the key, its mysterious symbols burned into his mind. He had tried to ignore it, tried to go back to his normal life. But something inside him told him that he couldn't. Not anymore. One evening, as he sat in his small apartment, the phone rang. He hesitated before answering, already knowing who it was. "Hello?" he said, his voice shaky. "Did you think I had forgotten about you?" Elon's voice came through the line, calm yet piercing. "I told you to think about it. Have you?" The salesman swallowed hard. "I've been thinking about it, but I still don't understand. What is this all about? What does that key unlock?" Elon didn't answer right away. Instead, there was a long pause, the kind that made the salesman's pulse quicken. Then, Elon spoke again, his words deliberate and filled with an intensity the salesman couldn't ignore. "Meet me tomorrow at 7 a.m. at the SpaceX headquarters. Bring the key. And bring an open mind. You'll find out soon enough." Before the salesman could respond, the line went dead. The next morning, the salesman found himself standing once again at the gates of SpaceX, but this time everything felt different. His heart raced, not just out of nerves, but from a deep, almost instinctive sense that something life-altering was about to happen. The security guards recognized him now, waving him through without question. He barely noticed the building's grand scale as he walked inside, his focus entirely on what awaited him. He was led into the same conference room, but this time, Elon wasn't there alone. At the far end of the table sat several people, each one more intimidating than the last. There was a man in his mid-50s with a stern face, a woman with an air of authority, and a younger guy who looked like he hadn't even shaved yet. They all looked at the salesman as he entered, their eyes scanning him in a way that made him feel like he was under a microscope. Elon stood up, his usual calm demeanor now replaced by a sense of urgency. "I see you brought the key," he said, his voice sharp. The salesman nodded, his grip tightening around the key in his pocket. "I don't know what I'm walking into, Mr. Musk, but I'm here." Elon gave a slight nod, then turned to the others. "This is the team," he said. "They've been working on something very important, something that, if successful, could change the world. But it's also dangerous. We need people who are willing to take risks, to think outside the box. And you, my friend, are that person." The salesman felt a wave of doubt wash over him. But before he could voice his concerns, Elon held up his hand. "You're not just here because of the key," Elon continued. "You're here because of your instincts. You made a choice when you walked into that dealership. You saw something in me, in the situation, that no one else would have. That's the kind of thinking we need." The team around the table exchanged looks, and the man in his 50s leaned forward. "What Musk is trying to say," he began, "is that we're about to launch a project that could impact global security. But we need someone with your background, someone who can think quickly, who understands the human side of things. We need someone who can understand the stakes. Because once we move forward, there's no going back." The younger guy, who had been silent up until now, added, "This isn't just a business venture, it's a revolution. It's about taking humanity to the next level. But it comes with risks that most people won't be able to understand until it's too late." The salesman felt a lump form in his throat. He had no idea what these people were talking about, but the gravity of the situation was starting to hit him. This wasn't just about a car purchase anymore. This was something much bigger, something that could alter the course of human history. Elon reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, metallic device. It looked like a simple USB drive, but the way he held it so carefully, almost reverently, told the salesman that it was anything but ordinary. "This," Elon said, holding it up, "is what the key unlocks. It's the beginning of something that could change everything, but only a few people in the world are ready for it. And you're one of them." The salesman stared at the device, his heart racing. His mind was reeling. He had no idea what this was about, but the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. Elon's voice broke through his thoughts. "You don't have to say yes right away. But I'm asking you to trust me. This is your chance to be part of something that could shape the future. You have the potential to change the world." The salesman looked around the table, at the faces of the people who had worked their entire lives for this moment. They were all waiting for him to make a decision, to say something, to take that first step into a world he had never imagined. He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the key once more. With a deep breath, he stood up. "I'll do it. I'm in." The room went silent for a moment, and then, one by one, the team members nodded. Elon's lips curled into a faint smile. "Welcome to the team," Elon said. What lies ahead for the salesman as he steps into a world where the stakes are higher than anything he's ever known? Stay tuned. The journey is just beginning. The salesman barely had time to process what had just happened before he found himself thrust into a whirlwind of activity. The next few weeks were a blur, meetings with scientists, engineers, and government officials who spoke in codes and terms he could barely understand. But through it all, one thing became clear: he was no longer just a salesman. He was part of something monumental, and it wasn't just about business anymore. It was about the future of humanity. One evening, as he sat in a small office overlooking the vast SpaceX campus, Elon Musk called him. His voice on the other end of the line was as calm and measured as ever, but there was a weight to it that the salesman had come to recognize. Something important was coming. "I need you to meet me at the facility tomorrow. We're about to start the next phase," Elon said, his words cutting through the stillness of the room. "Next phase?" the salesman asked, his heart picking up its pace. He had no idea what this meant, but the tone in Elon's voice made him realize that nothing was ordinary anymore. "Yes," Elon replied. "This is where the real work begins. We've built something incredible, but it's fragile. We need someone like you to help us guide it." The salesman had no idea what Elon was referring to, but he knew that he had to be there. He had no choice. The following morning, he arrived at the facility early, his mind racing. As he stepped through the massive doors, he was led down a corridor that seemed to stretch on forever. The silence was deafening, the only sound the echo of his footsteps as they reverberated off the cold concrete walls. When he reached the end of the hallway, he found himself in front of a large, sealed door. The guards at the entrance gave him a respectful nod before stepping aside to allow him in. Inside, Elon was waiting, standing before a large, sleek object that looked like a hybrid between a rocket and a spacecraft. The salesman's breath caught in his throat. It was beautiful, but more than that, it was intimidating. He could feel the weight of the project pressing down on him, as though the fate of everything depended on this very moment. Elon turned to him and smiled. "This," he said, gesturing to the object, "is the future, and it's yours to help shape." The salesman stood frozen, his mind racing. "I thought you said we were working on something that could change the world," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We are," Elon replied, his eyes gleaming with a fire the salesman had never seen before. "But this isn't just about technology. It's about a shift in consciousness, a transformation of how we see ourselves and the world around us. And it begins right here, right now." The salesman couldn't quite grasp the full meaning of what Elon was saying, but there was no mistaking the intensity and insidies. This was bigger than anything he could have imagined. As the team gathered around, Elon began explaining the intricacies of the project. The technology they were building was beyond anything the world had ever seen. It was designed to unlock new possibilities in space exploration, human potential, and even the nature of reality itself. But it came with risks, massive risks. And Elon needed people who were not only willing to take those risks, but also to understand the consequences. The salesman's mind spun as Elon spoke, but one thing stuck with him. This wasn't just about innovation. It was about pushing humanity beyond its limits, about transcending the very boundaries of what people thought was possible. And the key, the very same key he had held in his hands weeks ago, was the gateway to it all. As the meeting drew to a close, Elon leaned in and looked the salesman squarely in the eye. "There's one more thing," he said. "This is bigger than us. It's bigger than the technology, bigger than SpaceX. We're dealing with forces we don't fully understand. But we need someone with your perspective, someone who sees things differently, someone who won't be afraid to ask the tough questions." The salesman felt a chill run down his spine. What had he gotten himself into? He didn't know the answers, but he knew one thing for sure: there was no turning back now. As he left the facility that day, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking on the edge of something vast, something that could change everything. And as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the road ahead, he realized that he was no longer just a salesman. He was part of a movement, a force that could alter the very fabric of the future. But with that realization came a deeper question. What was he willing to sacrifice for this? The answer was uncertain. But as the stars began to twinkle overhead, one thing was clear: the journey was far from over. And the road ahead would be filled with twists, turns, and revelations that would challenge everything he thought he knew. What is the true nature of the project Elon Musk is leading? What will the salesman discover as he delves deeper into this world of secrecy and ambition? Stay tuned, because the most shocking revelations are still to come. The salesman's mind raced with questions, but as the days passed, the answers seemed to elude him, no matter how hard he tried to connect the dots. The project Elon Musk had introduced him to was vast, unfathomable, and increasingly mysterious. Every day he found himself diving deeper into the work, alongside a team of scientists, engineers, and strategists. Yet, the more he learned, the more he felt like a small cog in a machine that was much bigger than anything he could have ever imagined. Weeks turned into months. The project advanced at lightning speed, each breakthrough more stunning than the last. But the intensity of it all weighed heavily on the salesman. He began to understand the stakes. The technology they were building wasn't just for the future of humanity. It was a weapon. A force capable of reshaping society for better or for worse. And with it came responsibility, one that neither he nor anyone else was truly ready for. One evening, as he sat in his small office, the phone rang again. It was Elon. "I need you to meet me in a few hours," Elon said, his voice urgent but calm. "It's time." "Time for what?" the salesman asked, his pulse quickening. "You'll see," Elon replied, hanging up before he could get another word in. The meeting was set in a secluded location within the facility, one that the salesman had never visited before. As he entered the room, he was greeted by a handful of the project's top officials. Elon was standing at the front, looking at him with a mixture of anticipation and concern. "We've reached the final stage," Elon said, his tone serious. "It's time to test everything, but we can't do this without you." The salesman felt a knot form in his stomach. "Test? What do you mean?" Elon gestured toward a large metallic object in the center of the room. It was unlike anything the salesman had ever seen. The object hummed with an eerie energy, and a strange force seemed to pulse from it. It wasn't just technology. It was something else entirely, something that defied logic and reason. This, Elon explained, is the culmination of everything we've worked for. It can change the course of history, but it needs someone to trust it, someone who believes in the impossible. The salesman stood frozen, staring at the object. Every part of him screamed that something was wrong. This wasn't just a breakthrough, it was something far more dangerous. But as he looked around at the faces of the team, he saw the same determination, the same belief in the project's potential. No one else seemed to question it. "Why me?" the salesman asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because," Elon said, locking eyes with him, "you're the one who believed in it from the start. You saw beyond the surface. Now, it's your turn to take the next step." The salesman didn't know what to do. His instincts told him to run, to leave it all behind. But another part of him, the part that had been with him since that day in the dealership, told him that this was his destiny. This was what he was meant for. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, his heart pounding. As his hand brushed against the object, a surge of energy shot through him, sending shockwaves through his entire body. His mind raced with visions of the future of a world transformed, of a new era of humanity that seemed both beautiful and terrifying. But then, the world seemed to blur. The lines between reality and the unknown began to dissolve. The salesman was no longer sure if he was experiencing the future, the present, or something far beyond either. And then it happened. A shift. A wave of realization. The project wasn't just about technological progress. It was a bridge between the world as it was and a new reality that none of them could fully comprehend. As the salesman stumbled back, overwhelmed by the experience, Elon's voice broke through the chaos. "It's done," Elon said, his voice quieter now, almost as if he was speaking to himself. "But the journey doesn't end here. In fact, it's only just begun." The salesman stood there, breathless, his mind spinning. He had just witnessed something that could change the world in ways no one could predict. But the question remained, what would they do with this power? And who would control it? In that moment, the salesman realized something he hadn't before. This wasn't just about technology. It was about the choices humanity would make, and the consequences of those choices. And whether or not he was ready, he was now part of that future. As he walked out of the facility, the world seemed different. The weight of the unknown hung heavy on him. But he knew one thing for sure. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. What happens next? Will the salesman embrace the responsibility of this new world, or will he succumb to the fear of what it means? Stay tuned for the next chapter, as the twists unfold, and the true power of the project is revealed.